Nick Whalen, John McKechnie here, talking all things Wildcard weekend, giving you our best bets for the weekend, John. Just a great stretch of football that we're in the midst of right now. A monster 5-day stretch. What am I talking about, John? That kicked off with an excellent Notre Dame Penn State game last night. Notre Dame getting the win, punching their ticket to the national championship game. We get Ohio State and Texas tonight, and then all the NFL action kicking off on Saturday. Very interested to see where you're going this week with your picks. We each get 3 games that we want to discuss. You could take a total, you could take a side, you could do really whatever you want on Wild Card weekend. So we'll get right to it, John. Where are we going first? Where are you taking us?
Well, first to comment on just how good this stretch of football is. Yeah, last night's game absolutely delivered. I think do yourself a favor and catch the Ohio State game this evening, if for nothing else but to watch Jeremiah Smith. I don't know if I've seen anything quite like this. This is like Jamar Chase, but if he was a true freshman during the LSU run. I mean, it's bananas. And he doesn't have Joe Burrow as his quarterback. He's just kind of doing it himself. It's insane.
It's outrageous. I mean, really, the only other player who comes to mind, I think, who's anywhere close to him at the college level, has to be Justin Blackmon.
Yeah, well, of course. Hey, in a different universe, he is Calvin Johnson, and
Right.
Calvin Johnson is Justin Blackmon. But I digress. All right, so on Saturday we have some great games, and I'm targeting 2 of them, and I got a game on Sunday as well. But we'll lead off with my first play. This will shock the audience, but I like the Ravens laying 9.5 against the Steelers. I think you can draw some parallels to the game in late December in Baltimore between these two teams, where a lot of people were kind of stunned, a little sticker shock at the line being what it was. It was 6.5. It's like, the Steelers really, that they just lost to the Eagles, but that's not that big of a deal. And the Ravens never beat the Steelers, but there was a big reversal of fortunes in that game. The breaks kind of went Baltimore's way, and I'm not going to act like like the Steelers can't cover 9.5. I mean, they are a tough team. They can ugly up this game if they play their style. Then this ends up being a close game. I just don't think it's going to be that way. I think that the Steelers, the way that they limped into the postseason, having lost 4 straight games, they have not won or covered a playoff game since the 2016-2017 postseason. I believe they lost to the Patriots in the AFC Championship that year. I think that there's some discourse out there about the Ravens missing Zay Flowers in this game, and I mean, that's a big deal. He's the first Pro Bowl receiver that the Ravens have ever had, literally. So that's an issue, but I don't know. I think you can kind of draw an interesting distinction between what the Steelers have on offense and what the Ravens have on offense, where all of a sudden they're reduced to like one real receiver, Rashad Bateman, the same way that the Steelers are with George Pickens. But the depth around him, it's not so much at the receiver position, but the tight end advantage that the Ravens have, I think, is significant. I think Mark Andrews playing his best football in a little while here. I think he's caught a touchdown in 6 consecutive games. I think he's going to be a little bit more featured. That's a problem for the Steelers when Minkah Fitzpatrick has struggled the way that he has. And, last note here, really, a lot of people talked about, and myself included, Todd Monken forgetting to run the ball in the AFC Championship game last year. I think when you remove Zay Flowers from the equation and you have Derrick Henry, you like literally can't forget to run the football. So barring some turnovers and some batted passes, things of that nature that could slow this Ravens offense down, I just don't think that the Steelers defense is quite ready to shut this offense down. And on the other side, the Ravens defense has played extremely well, and it doesn't feel like the Steelers have the ammo offensively to hold up over 60 minutes. So could be close in the first half, but I think we'll see something similar to last time. Second half, the Ravens pull away. So I'm comfortable laying that 9.5 for Baltimore.
Yeah, I like that one. At 9.5, it's Baltimore for me. There are some 10s out there. That'd be something to think about. More of a stay away. I think this could very well be a game that lands on 10. I think that feels like a fair number. I know it's a big boost from when we saw this matchup just a few weeks ago. But is any team coming in colder to the postseason than the Pittsburgh Steelers? Green Bay maybe has a case, but the Steelers have lost 4 in a row straight up. They have not scored more than 17 points in any of those games. So rather than, try to pile on with you, I'm just going to go to one of my first plays, which is a derivative on this game, the under 43.5 in Pittsburgh, Baltimore. And we know the history here. And there are some caveats, right? Lamar's missed some games against Pittsburgh. There's been some weather and things of that nature. But if you go all the way back to 2019, 9 of the last 11 matchups have gone under this number. All 9 that failed, or all 9, I should say, that went under, failed to even get to 40 points. So when it goes under, it goes way under. Now, the big outlier, of course, is the last matchup less than a month ago, 34-17, 51 combined points. But I think in a playoff setting, third meeting, Pittsburgh could do just enough defensively to slow down Baltimore. I think you're right. This could be a bit of a slog in the first half. I think Pittsburgh plus 6.5 on the first half line is actually something I would look at. I mean, that was basically the game spread a few weeks ago. And, we saw this was a close game really until the end of the third quarter. Ravens have had some weird turnovers against Pittsburgh this year. They had 3 turnovers against the Steelers in that first matchup, which was a game that Baltimore honestly should have won, and just, kind of blew so many opportunities and gave Pittsburgh so many opportunities throughout that game. I think the Ravens clean it up. I think the Ravens win, but I don't know that we see the Ravens, putting up 30 plus points here. Like I could see this being it could be like a 27-10 type of game. It could be a 25 to 17, kind of a weird score. So 43.5, it's a little bit lower than I would like because of the offensive potential for the Ravens, where you almost feel like, they could account for 90% of getting us to the total here. But I have no faith in the Steelers offense right now. It's George Pickens or nothing. George Pickens is coming off of a just bizarre effort last week. I don't think he's going to be that bad again, but you worry about the focus. The Ravens obviously know that he is their only true downfield option. Ravens secondary has been significantly better, since week 10. You draw that line when they made the change with Kyle Hamilton. So I think this is a spot where Baltimore takes care of business, but it's more of a defensive chokeout, and Baltimore running the ball than it is this crazy offensive day for the Ravens. And Zay Flowers, by the way, had 5 for 100 on 8 targets in that last matchup with Pittsburgh. So I don't think that's enough of a swing piece where it makes me worry about Baltimore being in jeopardy as far as winning this game. But I think it's enough of a hit to this offense that maybe we see a little bit of a slower pace. We don't see as many big plays. We see the Ravens chewing up more clock. But the big thing I'm worried about here is like the backdoor over from a Derrick Henry long touchdown in the fourth quarter. If we can avoid that, I think we can cruise under 43.5. So I'm taking that. You're taking the Ravens on the spread. Where you got next, John?
So I will go back to the beginning, the undercard, the annual Houston Texans slot when they're in the playoffs, the early game on Saturday. So the Texans are, it's up to 3 now. They are underdogs against the Chargers. When I was finishing the prep for this game, Thursday, it was still 2.5. So a little bit of movement from Thursday into Friday, but I still like the Chargers at this number, maybe not as much as 2.5. I would like to have the field goal do the trick here, but I think the points largely remain the same as far as what I'm going to talk about. So, we mentioned going against teams that are cold coming into the postseason. I think the Texans also qualified. Last week doesn't really register to me as some sort of great turnaround for this Texans team. I think it's interesting how last year, and this is something that might give you some pause on going towards the Chargers. Last year, like 80% of the handle was on the Browns to beat the Texans. And everyone seems to have kind of memory hold that one, that everyone was out on the Texans. But it's a different point in time. I think it is the important thing to remember, where like the Texans were this amazing, fun surprise last year. And, they were a live wire, and ultimately, they came out and played their best game and just kind of really took it to the Browns. It doesn't feel like the Texans possess that punch right now that this season, and especially not at this stage. All the injuries that they've sustained on the offensive side of the ball, I think is a bit of a problem. So I don't know if the Texans can hold up necessarily over the course of this game. I think the under is interesting as well at 42.5 over at Bet Rivers. At other shops, it's 41.5. I think this is a low scoring game. I think the Chargers tend to play in low scoring games, but I think this is going to be one of those ones where the Chargers cover. They win by maybe like a touchdown or 4 points. but it's one of those ones where you sit back and say like that game wasn't as close as the scoreboard would suggest. So I do like the Chargers here. They are 7-2 on the road this season against the spread. That obviously that things change in the postseason. That's where I'm going. I think the Chargers get this done. They at least make it to the divisional round here.
I think you're right. And I do think this half point actually matters quite a bit, because you could totally see this being a field goal type of game. I think it will be very low scoring. I don't think we're going to see a ton of offense. I think we have two really good defenses more than anything. And, you have a Chargers offense that I think has certainly shown more potential lately than what we've seen from Houston, but it's still, unless they're playing the Bengals or maybe the Ravens, like I don't know if this is a team that necessarily needs to play that way. I don't think the Chargers want to get involved in a shootout. I don't think that's even a possibility necessarily in this matchup. So I think it's a defensively controlled game. I think it's one where, it could be 20-17, that type of final score. But I think you're right. There's a path here where the Chargers win this game by, 3 to 5 points, but it feels like they won it by a touchdown plus. Just because I don't think there's going to be a ton of offensive fireworks here. There's still not a ton of talent on this team offensively, for the Chargers, like, Lad McKechnie being the player that he's been right away. That's great. But I think Houston does have the personnel defensively to at least limit him. And then, all of a sudden you're asking Quentin Johnston to make a ton of plays for you. So at 3, I ended up backing away from this one. If you got it at 2.5 earlier in the week, maybe we even, bounce back there at some point before tomorrow. I think that's where I would play the Chargers. But in general, I like your read on this one. And the Texans are just a team that it feels like impossible to take right now. Like it's a hold your nose pick if there ever was one, when we're talking about a 2.5 or a 3-point spread, because of how this team has looked. And I know CJ Stroud, he went 6 for 6 on that first drive against Tennessee last week. That doesn't do it for me. There's so much bad will that needs to be undone with that Houston offense.
There really is. They've been, I think we were too quick to crown the Texans in hindsight. And I don't know. I still don't feel like it was bad process necessarily. I mean, no. Stroud doing what he did as a rookie. Yeah, that is the crazy thing. It's like, wow, what an awful season for the Texans. Yeah. They won their division, but there is the AFC South caveat. Yeah. But they had Diggs, they had Mixon. You thought that it was going to be wheels up yet again, but so progress isn't linear. I still believe in this Texans core and D'Amico Ryans and Stroud and all that, but this year I think it's a one and done for them.
Yeah, this is another game where I would lean under, by the way. I don't trust really either offense. I think we got two good defenses, and 42.5 is low, but if I like the under 43.5 in a game that includes an offense like Baltimore, I think I have to like it here as well. Texans, by the way, as a teaser leg, interesting. Get them up to 9, maybe tie that in with Buffalo, bring them down to 2.5, and then you could rope in the Rams, bring them up to 8.5. You could rope in either side or really the Commanders side in that Bucks game, or Green Bay or Philly as a third leg there. So something to consider. I think Houston and Buffalo are the two obvious ones when you're looking at that. I'm going to go to that Philly Green Bay game, John, and I'm going to take the Eagles minus 4.5. I'm not as firm on this now on Friday morning as I was earlier in the week. There's some concern about Jalen Hurts, more so for me, rust than any lingering concussion symptoms. It's not like he's been in concussion protocol for 3 weeks. Like he technically has, but they just didn't really try to get him out of it until 2 days ago. So I'm not worried about, Hurts' condition necessarily, but the guy hasn't played in basically 3 weeks. And I think, going into a playoff game, with that situation is not ideal. So it wouldn't shock me if Philly, a team that has started slowly all season, does have a little bit of rust to shake off. I think the AJ Brown situation is a little weird. He's going to play. There's no question about that. Is he going to be 100%? I'm not sure. I think that matters, against this Green Bay secondary that's banged up and I think pretty vulnerable. But ultimately, I don't think Green Bay has a switch to flip. I still think, the way that we talk about the Packers, there's this belief that if they play their best game, they could beat anybody. I guess I get that. They've hung in with Detroit. They've hung in with Minnesota. They've hung in with Philly. They haven't beaten anybody good. They've not actually proven that they can get over the mountaintop in these games. And they feel a little bit overmatched talent-wise. They feel a little bit overmatched coaching-wise in these games. What does worry me is that Green Bay has found ways, after playing 3 terrible quarters against good teams, to end up covering And it wouldn't shock me, if we saw that again, similar to how it played out against Minnesota in week 17. But it has to be Philly or nothing for me. I think the Eagles can grind out this game. I think it could end up being a quick game, where both teams are trying to run the ball. We get long possessions. Philly ends up chewing a lot of clock in the first half. And obviously they've been better than anybody at doing that to close out games over the final 2 quarters. And I don't think Green Bay can hit enough big plays on the Philly defense to hang in. I'm pretty confident that Philly can get to 24, 27, maybe 30 points, but without Christian Watson, with Jaden Reed giving you like 20 yards a week, with Tucker Kraft kind of going in and out, like Green Bay needs to hit, a couple of those big ones to keep up with Philly. And I don't really know that they have the personnel to do it right now. The way that Jordan Love is playing, he's not really taking those chances. Philly, to me, they're at home. They're the more physical team. They're better in both trenches. I think right now they're the better coach team. Not that I necessarily have like a ton of faith in Nick Sirianni, but how do you have faith in Matt LaFleur in a big game, given what we've seen this season? I also think Green Bay could struggle to run the ball. Like the path, of course, for the Packers is, just pound Josh Jacobs 25 times. Well, you can't. You got to play with a lead, essentially, if you're going to run that plan. I think that was the plan going into the Minnesota game. And when you're down, 10-0 and then 13-0 early on, it's really tough to dedicate yourself to that. So I could see this game being close early on. I could see, Green Bay doing what they do and finding a way to claw their way back in. But ultimately at 4.5, I'm on the Eagles at home.
I think that's the right side as well. And I'm interested in seeing, Philadelphia has such well-established play styles and trends and philosophies over the course of this season. Like they are the team that starts slow and the team that just kind of, they land these haymakers in the first half, and then they land those body blows, and then they become haymakers in the second half. I do wonder if Philadelphia tries to get a little bit out of themselves here, kind of overthinking it and trying to do these a quick start to kind of set the tone in this game. But I think dollars to donuts, they are still going to be able to get back to what they do best. And I think Saquon's going to have the big game here, and over the course of the game, be able to wear him down. And there's no offensive firepower for this Packers team, at least how it matches up with this Eagles defense. You worry about the interior pass rush getting through to Jordan Love, and then he can make some boneheaded throws, some boneheaded decisions in those instances, and there's a lot of ball hawks in that secondary to make them pay for it. My last comment here regarding the Packers: did you see the video of Luke Musgrave?
I did.
Okay. Yes. Fans, if you have not looked at it yet, I believe it's in. If my eyes are correct, Nick, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, it looked like it was in Wisconsin staple, a Quick Trip.
That's right.
Quick with the K, folks. Sitting down at a nice table in a Quick Trip and sampling a nice glass of chocolate milk, the same way that someone would drink a glass of wine. And it's very funny. So I did love that for the Packers. That's good vibes. So obviously, their tight ends have strong bones, but in the end, I like the Eagles here too.
Yeah. Last thing I'll say on Jordan Love is I don't know if he's playing with confidence right now. There's been some kind of weird comments, from him over the last couple of games. He just seems a little bit lost between, gunslinger Love and also not trying to throw picks, Jordan Love. And it's like, I think I like Gunslinger Love better, better than the version of Love that we've seen the last couple of weeks. Especially in a matchup like this, on the road at Philly against a team that doesn't leave you much margin for error. I think you got to be willing to take chances, and you have to be willing to live with it. And Green Bay seems to be hitting these, these deep plays at a higher rate than they should. You look at some of the plays Jaden Reed had early in the year, thrown into double coverage. He comes down with it. You're not going to have guys running wide open against the secondary. And I think if they're not willing to take chances, if they try to, play this somewhat conservatively, I don't think you're going to match the physicality. You're not going to be able to match that ground game of the Eagles. So Eagles -4.5. We're locking that one in. Your third and final game, John.
All right. I am going to take the under in Tampa Bay, Washington. I mean, it's, you're aiming high here. I mean, 50.5 is a big number, so that a lot of cushion here for the under, but I do like it. I think that we have Jaden Daniels. I don't think the moment's too big for him, but it's not something to completely sweep away that this is his first playoff game. It's going to be on the road in Tampa here. These teams, both of them stylistically, kind of match up similarly as far as the length of their drives, the time of possession. Tampa Bay was number one in time of possession this year. So if Tampa is, kind of methodically moving the ball down the field, that's going to kind of limit the number of possessions for Washington. And I think by extension of that, it's going to add some pressure to those possessions, because Washington's going to be like, okay, like we just gave up another 7-minute drive here. Like, we have to get going here. And do they play outside of themselves a little bit, get off script, and then, they have a 3-and-out, give up another long drive, things could get away from them a little bit. So I'm concerned there. And I think that, just the fact that both of these teams do those sustained drives, I think that this ends up shortening the game, even though we don't think of these teams as like tremendous rushing attacks necessarily, but the clock is going to be rolling here, in my opinion. And, I think Washington's offense is fairly easy to figure out for Tampa's defense, in the sense that, if you take McLaurin and Ertz out of the equation, there's not a whole lot of other big playmakers that can really hurt you. I know Tampa Bay can obviously kind of make this number a little bit tricky, but I think with Washington having Marshawn Lattimore in the fold, shout out Marcus Lattimore though, of course. I think that this ends up being like something where I cap what I would expect the Bucs team total to be at, like 20, 24, maybe 27, something like that. And I do like Tampa Bay to cover this one, but I'm stronger on the under. I think that ultimately these two teams play somewhere in the mid 40s.
Yeah, I think this could be it feels like an obvious over, and maybe we fade that situation. And I'll disagree with you a little bit on the rushing attacks. I think these are both two really good running teams. I mean, they're number 1 and number 6 in terms of rushing EPA. They're number 3 and number 4 in terms of total rushing yards. Obviously, yards per game. Every team's played the same number of games at this point. I think it is a game that could be controlled on the ground, and it really depends. How many big running plays are we getting? How many 35 yarders is Bucky Irving breaking off? From an explosiveness standpoint, I think you worry about Tampa Bay more. I think they'll be more aggressive. I think Washington is the team that would prefer to slow this game down. They've had so many of those games where it feels like they're just converting every single third or fourth down, and they finish like 11 of 17 on third downs. And if that happens, I think that leads to long drives. I think we could see efficient scoring really on both sides. But if we have these 8 to 12 play drives throughout the game, and you're burning half of the quarter doing that, I think that is an interesting way to look at it. And my big concern here would be the injuries in the Tampa Bay secondary, and how many of those guys are back, and how much does it matter against a Washington team that has been efficient through the air, but really only has one true weapon that you worry about. It's like, can Tampa Bay limit Terry McLaurin and force the Zach Ertzes and the Olamide Zaccheauses of the world to beat them?
Right. And that's where I stop short of Washington being able to hold up their end of the bargain to go ahead and push this towards the over. Apologies for pushing the false narrative that I wasn't saying that they can't run it. I don't, when I look at these two teams, the run games aren't necessarily the first thing that I think about, but obviously Bucky Irving, tremendous this year.
Marquise Irving. Very excited to draft him in fantasy next year.
Oh, yeah.
All right, my third and final game, John. We had a lot of options here. I thought about just, kind of eating the points with Buffalo. I thought about taking a side in Washington, Tampa Bay, but I'm going to go to a total here. I'm going to take the over 47.5 in Minnesota and LA. So, of course, this is now a neutral site game. I don't think that matters a ton. We saw the line shift about a point in favor of Minnesota after that news came out, which I understand. I get it. I think it would be a bigger deal if you were moving a Steelers game out of Pittsburgh or a Packers game out of Green Bay. But, nothing against the Rams fans. I think they bring it for the postseason. So certainly an advantage for Minnesota, but not one that necessarily, derails anything that I think about this game. I think we see a bounce back from the Minnesota Vikings. I think everybody's ready to kind of pounce on Sam Darnold after last week, and perhaps rightfully so. That was his worst game of the year. He was missing throws all over the place. I think if Darnold even makes like 2 of those throws in the first half, and let's say a field goal turns into a touchdown, and one of the fourth down failures turns into a score, I think we get a different game. I think that started to snowball for Darnold, started to snowball for the entire Minnesota offense. They kind of started operating in ways that they don't normally, kind of feeling like you have to get it all back. And I think the larger sample this season suggests that Sam Darnold will not play that way. Now, he's never started a playoff game. It's a big variable. It's even if it's a neutral site game, he's not going to be at home, and I think that does matter. But I'm putting some faith in the Minnesota offense. I think they get back on track. I think they take advantage of what's still a pretty shaky LA Rams secondary. And if the Vikings are scoring points, I think that's going to force the LA Rams to have to keep up. So I don't know that this is a Kyren Williams 24 carries for 108 yards game. I think the Rams are capable of that. We certainly saw it against Buffalo a month ago. They're a team that they're not limping into the playoffs by any means. They had won 3 in a row, or 4 in a row, I should say, with that Buffalo win prior to Week 18. But the offense had looked terrible in 3 of those games. So part of that to me thinks, I think they know when they're playing inferior competition, they can win on the ground. We haven't seen a lot of Cooper Kupp. I think that's a little bit of a red herring. I think he's back in the game plan this week. Obviously, you got, Puka Nacua, who's ready for his 15 targets. So I think this turns into somewhat of a shootout. I think we have 2 really good offenses. We have 2 really good head coaches. I'm putting my faith in Sam Darnold to put up points. We know Matthew Stafford is capable of that in the postseason. And, I think for these 2 teams, especially Minnesota, which has been one of the highest scoring teams in the NFL this year, 47.5 is pretty attainable. I think could we get a 27-24 game? I think we can.
I think so too. And I think it's important to maybe not grade with too sharp of a pencil against the way that the Vikings played last week. Like, they were getting into the red zone. They just weren't converting. And it was Darnold's worst game, like you said, but and I know that Detroit's defense is banged up, and therefore, like, they shouldn't have been able to disrupt the Vikings offense the way that it did. But so that's a way in which the Rams can do it. But I don't know if the Rams are going to be that just berserker aggressive on the blitz. I think that has shown to be a way to get Darnold off of his spot a little bit, but I'm not sure that the Rams are able to kind of like copy that defensive game plan 1-to-1. So if the Vikings offense gets itself into rhythm, then they're cruising, and then all of a sudden, I think Stafford's going to answer nicely in this game. I think he's a vet that can do some stuff against this Brian Flores defense that maybe a lot of other quarterbacks in the NFC side of the bracket cannot. So I think we get a nice back and forth, and this ends up being like the kind of wild track meet type of game that we would hope for a standalone Monday Night Football game to close out Wildcard weekend. Stray thought here. I'm just starting a dialogue.
Okay.
If the Rams lose, or maybe they fall short this year,
okay,
is this the end of the road for Stafford?
That's a great question. That's something I've wondered myself. I almost wonder if it's more likely that if they win the Super Bowl, that would be the end of the road.
Oh, absolutely.
It's possible. It's possible. We were talking about that on SXM this week. Mostly pertaining to looking ahead to where you drafted Puka Nacua, and it's like, well, I want to know who the quarterback is. And I think there's a real chance Stafford could walk away. He's got a Super Bowl, right? I mean, I think it's more likely than not that he's back, but that's a distinct possibility.
I think so too. Kupp's getting older, and I know that they're boys. Not that Kupp is going to retire, I don't think. But yeah, Stafford is, over the balance of his career, and he's been in the league for a long time at this point. That's a guy that's taken some licks. That's a guy that's gotten banged up a lot. He doesn't have a whole lot else to prove, but the Rams are still good. It's hard to walk away from it, but it's just something I've been pondering